Hello and welcome to my channel. My name's Jo. This channel is called Joey Sewy, and today we've got a video that I've been wanting to do for ages because it is my top 5 things that you can use in sewing that are completely free. Let's jump straight into this with number 1. So number 1 is a lump jumper. Which you might never have used, but when you need one, you really need one. So this is what they look like when they're purchased. This is something that came with my sewing machine. It is 3 pieces of plastic that you can layer on top of each other. You can use 1 layer, you can use 2 layers, you can use 3 layers. And here is my one that I have made by the very complicated process of folding a piece of cardboard. Why do you need a lump jumper? You need it when you need to jump over a lump, and it's relevant in projects like jeans, but not just jeans. So if you haven't made jeans yet, or jeans are something that you have no desire to sew, don't worry, you may come across this anyway, but maybe not often enough that you actually want to buy something, and the cardboard version works just as well. So there are lumps in our sewing where we need to change height, or we need to sew at the edge of something. For example, there's top stitching on a jeans pocket, and your sewing machine foot wants to start at the edge of the top stitching, but it ends up needing to do a wheelie and sew uphill. Now, sewing machine feet are not good at sewing uphill or downhill. That is when they tend to skip stitches. So when they have to go up like that to, if this is your jeans pocket, for example, to go onto there, you're likely to skip a stitch. And equally, when you're coming down the other side, you're quite possible that you're going to skip a stitch as well. Or what happens with your sewing machine foot will stay up until the last minute, and then it'll slip down and you'll do 2 stitches where there should have just been 1. So what a lump jumper does is basically help lift up. So as you came up to that lump, you would put this behind there, and then your sewing machine again can sew flat. And as you're coming to the other end, as you start to go down, just for a couple of stitches, you would actually lift up the front edge of the foot. So you could sew to the edge, and then maybe you'd hand crank past the last stitch, and then your sewing machine is off the lump and flat again. This is fantastically adjustable, because if you need something thick, you fold it up really thick, and if you need it less thick, you unfold it until it is less narrow. This was a leaflet from somewhere that we visited on holiday a few years ago, and I quite like that. I really had no reason to keep the leaflet, but it's got sentimental value because it was a lovely visit. So I keep this in my sewing box, and every time I get it out, not only is it really useful, it also reminds me of being on holiday. So that is thing number 1. Thing number 2 I use all the time. It's Sharpie pens. Now, my deep dark secret about sewing, one of them, I must have many, is that I mark my notches with Sharpie pens. I don't snip them. I don't use fancy washable or fadeable pens. I use a Sharpie. Now, I don't draw a big V shape. I don't do that. I just take the edge of my fabric, so let's pretend that's the fabric. I've cut it out. I just take the edge, and let's also pretend I've taken the lid off this because I'm not going to draw on my real clothes. But I just brush that on the edge of the fabric like so. So you get a tiny little dot lined up with the point of the V of the notch, so it's very accurate, and that marks my notches. I find that if you cut the notch either in the V or just as a slit, they're not as visible, and I often lose them, or I spend ages looking for them, and I don't have that patience. So if I mark with a Sharpie, much more visible, easy to find. You need to test it, because there's some fabrics that dot will bleed a long way, and perhaps it's not appropriate. But to be honest, I find that in maybe 1 project in 10. Most projects, it's absolutely fine to use a Sharpie. You probably want several colours, because I do try and use a colour that is close to my fabric. So this pinkish colour I tend to use on white fabric, for example. Red, blue, Sharpies classically come in black, and it will show up on black fabric most of the time. So test it, make sure it doesn't bleed too far, make sure it's visible but not too visible, and just be a bit intelligent about where you use it. So don't mark your dots with a Sharpie, because they tend to be at the point of a dart, for example, and you'll have a big Sharpie spot, permanent marker, remember, at the point of your bust or on the bottom of your trousers. You don't want that, so don't mark the dots that way. just the edges where they're either going to get trimmed off or completely enclosed. Use it on completely solid fabrics, so fabrics that you can't see through. Or if you're going to use it on see-through fabrics, just make sure that either you can't see through enough to see the Sharpie, or as I said, it's on an edge that's going to be trimmed. So use your common sense, but I use this on 9 times out of 10 on all my projects to mark my notches. I also use it for marking up patterns, for marking up alterations. I use Sharpies all the time. So there you go, number 2. And I should say, you don't have to use Sharpies. This is not sponsored at all. You could use a biro, you could use pencil. You just need to make sure it's not water soluble what you use, because then the steam of your iron will transfer, or could transfer, a water soluble ink. Make sure it's visible and it doesn't spread in another way, and make sure it actually can easily make a mark on the fabric. So the great thing about Sharpies is you just have to brush the tip onto the fabric and it stays. So that's why I've got into the habit of using Sharpies, but anything similar, just do a test. Now I'm filming this in May, so this is not very seasonable. Seasonable? What's even seasonable? It's not very seasonal. But this is my 3rd free item, and this is a little tiny screwdriver that came in a Christmas cracker. So next time that it's Christmas and you get a weird tiny screwdriver that appears to have no use whatsoever, what it's great for is for changing your sewing machine needles. So it's got a tiny little head. Also, they're not very robust, so they're not going to be great for anything that needs any force, and a sewing machine doesn't need any force to change its needles, certainly shouldn't. So they're perfect for that. I have a little magnet next to my machine, not on my machine because it's computerized and I don't want to mess with the electronics. And it just sticks on the wall basically, and when I need it I take it down, use it, put it back. Easy. Now your machine might have come with a screwdriver, that's fine, but maybe you need a backup. What if you lost it? What if you got a second-hand machine and it didn't come with a screwdriver? It's a really good place to pick one up. Next we have another cardboard item. So this is a bought item called a hot hemmer by Clover. You can purchase these. This is a homemade alternative, which, to be honest, although it won't last as long as the purchased one, is just as good. So there's some pictures on this that show you what it's for. It's for folding fabric over the top of and marking where you want the hem, or folding it around the corner as this one shows. And this one shows how you can even mark internal corners. So this has got all sorts of fancy lines on it, bias. It's got a curve, which you could make in cardboard. There's no reason not to. The whole principle of it is basically it gives you something firm and fireproof that you can iron around and over. Cardboard works just as well. Now it probably will distort with steam, so you might have to make a new one for each project, but you're making it with something that you got out of the recycling and you were going to throw away anyway. And the way you make it is you simply mark the line you need for the particular project you're doing. I've done this one with 2, 4 and 6 centimeters just to show you, but whatever hem you needed, so if your garment's got a 3 centimeter hem, mark a 3 centimeter line. And then when you fold your fabric over, if this was your fabric, you fold it over, push that right to the edge of the fold and make sure that your fabric lines up with the line that you're trying to follow. And that way, all the way along the ironing board, you keep moving it along and you get a really accurate result of the hem. It's good for long hems where you don't want to have to measure and pin the whole thing, very dull. So you can use this and you're measuring at the same time, and folding tightly around the cardboard is a really good way to accurately get that fold as well. So super simple. This kind of cardboard, you can see it's come from a Diet Coke multi-pack. It's got a slightly plasticky coating, so that's going to make the thing last longer, which is an advantage. Just test that there's nothing water soluble on it. Again, like I said with the Sharpie, steam will move anything water soluble, so I've done this with pencil, that's not going to move, and make sure the inks on anything you use aren't going to move with steam. Secondly, you could use completely brown cardboard, so those stiffened envelopes that sometimes things get delivered in, they're really good. You don't want to use corrugated cardboard because it'll get squashed under the iron, but this sort of thickness and this sort of rigidity of cardboard is perfect. So there you go, a cardboard pressing guide. Also really useful for pleats. So if you're making pleats, again, you can make it bespoke for the particular project that you're using, mark up where each pleat needs to be folded to, and it makes the job much faster. And so our fifth item is about cutting out and about how do you keep your pattern still. So I cut with a rotary cutter and mat, both of which are fairly hefty investments, but this is valid whether you cut that way or whether you cut in the more traditional way with scissors. Now the very traditional way of cutting is to pin your tissue paper pattern to fabric and then cut around while the paper is on the fabric. That's actually probably the least good way of cutting out as well, because it risks distortion. You also risk tearing the pattern. If you're not using a tissue paper pattern, it's quite tough to pin through printer paper, for example, and the distortion problems get worse when you're pinning through thicker paper. So rotary cutting aside, which I'm a big fan of but requires cost, you can hold your patterns down with heavy items. So lay your fabric out as you would, ideally on a hard surface, so a table or a hard floor. There'll be no pins involved with this, so you can use a table with a nice surface. Hold it down with either tins of food, which are about ½ kilo each often, nearly, and heavy flat items, so old or new, heavy, thick, hardback books. Ideally have different sizes to hand because your pattern pieces are going to be different sizes. Now, the advantage of these is that they're nice and heavy. They have circular bottoms, so you can hold circular, smaller areas of pattern pieces. The advantage of books, let me just put my tins down. The advantage of books is that they're flat and large, so they really hold that paper nice and flat against the fabric, and that's why you need a hard surface, because if you're cutting on carpet, if it's all you've got, it's all you've got. But if you're cutting on carpet, then you might actually squish into the carpet slightly. And rather than cut around with these on, what these are going to do is hold your pattern pieces in place and then trace around the pattern pieces with chalk, with Sharpie if it doesn't bleed, with any item, because what you're going to do as your second step, once you've got all the things traced out, is you're going to take this off, you're going to take the pattern pieces off, and you're going to cut just inside the line, which is how you get the accurate size of the pattern piece and how you lose the fact that you've just drawn on the fabric. You won't have any of that line because you're going to cut just inside the line. And these flat things hold down your pieces accurately. I do actually have a sixth bonus tip for you. So this tip I didn't plan, but I was looking around the kitchen for the cardboard that I've shown you in my other tips, and I found kebab skewers, as you do, disposable ones. Now these are made with bamboo, but the point about them is I have a point turner, which is a little pokey tool, and it's great for turning out collars or anywhere where you need to turn inside out. You've sewn around a collar, for example, or a waistband, and you just need to poke into those corners to get everything turned really well. And I thought this was great because it's got this end, which is a little bit fatter and definitely not sharp, but quite accurate for pushing. And it has this end, which is sharp but not needle sharp, and nice and accurate. So items like that in your cutlery drawer in your kitchen will help you do turning jobs. And as I say, you can buy point turners. Every gadget that I've shown you, you can buy things that will help you do these jobs, but all of this stuff is completely free, so you can try that one. And that is us done for today. I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope at least one of my tips was new to you, and even better than that, if you've got any really good free or low cost tips, let us know down in the comments below, because I know a lot of you have got masses of experience and knowledge, and even if you haven't, you might have just come across something that's like, that's genius and it cost me nothing. So I'd love for us to all to share those, so put that down in the comments below. If you're able to support my channel, you can go to my Ko-fi page, which is like Patreon, if you know Patreon. It's a way that you can make a small donation to say thank you for my content. Even if the only way, the best way you have of saying thank you is watching my channel, I really deeply appreciate everything that you guys do for me, and I want to say thank you every single time. I'll see you again soon with a second part to this series, which is my 5 things that I think you should spend money on when you're sewing. Bye for now.